Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chad. I'm the host of the Industrial Real Estate Show, and I'm very excited to bring another great episode. And if you've caught a number of interviews that we've done in the past, we try to cover as much of the spectrum as we can, and that includes professionals in different areas. That also includes property owners and brokers. And we've interviewed a number of top brokers all across North America. But in this episode, we're actually going to be interviewing Tanner Lee from Colliers, who joined the industry in 2021. So he's coming into his second year of brokerage, and he's had some early success already. And I thought it'd be very interesting for anybody that's new into the industry or considering getting into industrial real estate to hear from someone who's gone through this career change as well and get some tips and advice on things that have worked for him that hopefully would be applicable for you as well. So with that introduction the way, I'm pleased to be joined by Tanner. Tanner, good to see you, my friend.
Chad, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to this podcast.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for taking the time to do this. I know that when you're starting off in this career, you seem to be inundated with so many different things that you need to be doing all the time. So I can appreciate how busy you are, and I can appreciate that you probably have a lot of things lined up as we're going through this podcast and your phone calls and emails to get back to. So I'm grateful for you taking the time to do this. And I want to jump right into it. There's a number of things I want to explore with you about how you made the transition, how you chose a brokerage, and then some of the things that have worked for you along the way. But before we even get into that, could you just share with me your background, what you were doing previous to brokerage, up into the point where you decided you wanted to pursue that as a career?
Sure. Yeah. That's a great place to start. The windy road of becoming a commercial or real estate broker. I'm originally from Brunswick, Georgia, and moved over to Amelia Island, which is the most northeastern point of Florida, about midway through high school, and ended up going to college. I thought I was going to go to med school, actually. And senior year, I figured out that was not the route I wanted to take. And my roommate there was getting his MBA my senior year, and I thought, wow, I really should have gotten my business degree, but it's a little too late to change. So let me just finish up. And what I'll do is as soon as I graduate, I'll go out and get a sales job. And that had a lot to do with my personality, better understanding about who I was. I knew I was a very outgoing individual. And so, being in business development, sales can be draining to some people. It's the opposite for me. Going out and shaking hands provides me with energy. And so I knew that about myself. And so that gave me at least the initial guidance to get into some business development role. There was an opportunity that came up in the food distribution space. So a local food service provider here in Jacksonville, Florida, gave me an opportunity took a chance on me, no sales experience, pre-med background, to start selling food to restaurants. And so that's what I did for about 3.5 years. Ended up transferring over to a larger food distributor called Gordon Food Service, and came on board to help them open up downtown Jacksonville, and with the thought of moving into St. Augustine after a few years to help open up that territory. But COVID hit, so I was with them for a little under 2 years before COVID hit. Everyone knows what happened to the restaurant industry at that point. My route went to zero overnight, and it forced me to change my trajectory. And it was something I'd been thinking about for a while. I didn't quite know what direction I wanted to go in. I think the foundation of it is I wanted to be a better investor. And so I thought either financial advising or commercial real estate was the route. And I decided financial advising, actually. And I started interviewing with a few firms, and actually was shadowing a friend of mine who's a financial advisor, older gentleman on Amelia Island, Steve Nicholas. Shout out to you, sir. I was shadowing him, and Uh, Probably did that for 2 months before I said, this isn't for me. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I said, I'm going to go into commercial real estate. And that was about as specific as I had in my mind, just the broad answer of commercial real estate. Didn't know what asset class. And so I asked his opinion. Hey, do you know anyone I should speak with? He put me on to one of the top guys there on Amelia Island, and interviewed with him. He just so happened to be a Colliers broker, and interviewed with him. He did investment sales. I said, well, what is that? What's an investment sale? I had no idea. And I thought the interview went well. And I guess afterwards he had cold feet, and he said he doesn't have time to train me, which I totally get where he was coming from. It's a lot to take on someone with no experience in commercial real estate and train them up. It's a very time consuming, especially for a seasoned broker who's running 100 miles an hour in every direction. And so, but the managing partner there called me back, and he said, hey, there's another team that is looking to bring on a junior broker, and I suggest you go and interview with them. I said, well, what do they do? They do industrial. Okay, what is that? I don't even know what industrial is. And so I agreed to shadowing him for a few weeks. And as soon as I shadowed him, it all clicked. I said, this is exactly where I want to be. This is the team I want to be on. And, the rest is history.
We have very similar stories on that, actually. And it's funny when I talk to newer, younger brokers right now, I always recommend that they talk to a number of different brokerages before making a decision. I say you want to make the most educated decision you can, and to do that, you really need to talk to a number of brokerages. Like yourself, though, I actually I had 2 interviews. This is back in 2004. I had 2 interviews, and I canceled the second interview because the first interview went so well, and I just knew that it was where I wanted to be, and I took a job on the spot. So it's, you and I have very similar experiences that way, where if you feel that there's a good fit, capitalize on the opportunity. And also, like you, I had no idea what industrial real estate was when I started either. I thought commercial real estate. I thought I'd be working in office towers or shopping malls, like the part of commercial real estate that everybody's somewhat familiar with. Like yourself, if you fall into a spot, you take advantage of it. So you're now new into industrial. You're on a team. You've joined a brokerage. What was the first things that you did to even get brought up to speed on what industrial real estate was and how you're going to make a career out of this?
Yeah. So let me say the most important was just being part of a high producing team who specializes. I did interview with a few smaller firms, and to your point, they wanted me to get into retail leasing, and so it wasn't really on a team. So I would pretty much be a generalist to a degree, with no real mentor. Having a mentor was important to me. So when I came on the team, it's a husband and wife team, and they work really well together. And so I came in as support. And so that's a great question that you asked. What was the first things I did? Anything that they needed me to do. So really what helped me, I guess, get a better understanding for the market was creating tour books for clients, tenants looking for space. They would have me put those together. And so I learned the market fairly quickly that way, got a general understanding about it. And then eventually showings and property tours, those were really helpful in my understanding about what's important to occupiers.
You mentioned the importance of having a mentor in that. What was it that made you want to have that mentor in place?
So it's always been important to me to have a mentor in life. They're just invaluable. You can't put a price tag on it. just to have that, and someone who's as a top producer in the market. When I understood, where he stood amongst the other brokers, I thought, this is who I want to attach myself to and grow with and be a part of. The amount of stuff that I absorb and learn without even recognizing that I'm absorbing all of this information. It's just something that it's the intangible that you don't get when you're by yourself at a smaller brokerage.
Yeah, great point on that. And an earlier point that you made as well is that the first gentleman that you interviewed with Colliers, who was on the investment side, he said he didn't have time to train you. And I think this is a really important point to drive home, because I've found over the 18 years or so that I've been in this business that a lot of young brokers actually fail. And I think one of the reasons that they do fail is because they don't have they're not at the right brokerage, they don't have the right platform, perhaps they're not the right person to even be doing brokerage. But more often than not, that I find it's actually from the mentor, the person who's tasked with having to train that person. And as you said, there's a lot that you have to learn at that beginning. And if the broker is too busy to be taking that time to invest with you, then you miss out on all that knowledge that they're transferring over to you. So and you started in 2021, I believe, right?
Correct. Yep. October 2021.
So when you were meeting with the husband and wife team that were your mentors, what were some of the programs? What were some of the things that they had you doing? You mentioned tour books. You mentioned going on tours. What was it that facilitated the environment that you could learn under so you could prosper?
Thinking about my mentors, they now my partners, they would always bring me in on meetings, and that was really invaluable, sitting in on those conversations, hearing and watching and witnessing how the lead broker handles his business, and how can I replicate what he does, right? So having that, just having someone that you could replicate. Hey, this is a top producer. I get a front row seat on how he operates, the way he has his conversations, how he sets up meetings, the conversations he's having. You just don't get that experience while you're by yourself at smaller brokerage.
Yeah, it's an apprenticeship essentially. And
Sure.
and I've mentioned this before on previous videos that I've done, is the person that you're mentoring under, you need to be under somebody that's proficient and they're a producer and they've had success, but you also need to have somebody that's investing in your personal success. And there's some assistant programs out there where the new broker comes on and they're doing a lot of menial work, and that can just be photocopies, that can be getting people's dry cleaning. Like that actually does exist. That's not just something that you hear about as fiction. That does exist, where there are some assistants that don't actually get to sit in on these meetings. They don't get to talk to clients. They don't get to reach out to other brokers or reach out to property owners. And that can really stunt the growth of a new agent. If they, for you, an example, you went through university, the last thing you want to do after you spend all that money and all that time in university just sitting in a cubicle sending emails, checking on status reports. You want to actually feel the action on it. So I think that is really important, and you've identified that. You found a guy who was a successful broker in your market, and turns out he's also very willing to give you your time. What else would you say to somebody that, because you're 2 years in, coming into your second year now, what would you say to someone that's considering getting into this brokerage business on how they find that situation that you found?
Yeah. So let me say, it can be very intimidating getting into commercial real estate. Your gut will say, let's just get into residential. It's easier. But it's the same licensing, and commercial real estate. There's a lot less emotion into it on the sales side. And so my advice would be, interview with all of the top brokerage firms in the area. whether that's CBRE, JLL, Cushman, Colliers, and then all the smaller local brokerages as well, and see what teams are looking for help. And so what you would do is speak with whoever the managing partner is there at the brokerage, and ask him, what teams are here, who needs help, and as someone with no experience, the best tool that you could give to the team that you come on board with is giving them their time back. Chad, you mentioned whether that could be dry cleaning, that could just be grabbing photocopies or going to the printer, making runs, mailers. Sometimes that is what you have to do, because what that senior broker is looking to accomplish by bringing you on is gaining his time back. And so, to the point of, the first guy I interviewed with, he didn't have time. And I think that's probably going to be a common hurdle you're going to have to get over. But when you find that, one broker or two brokers that don't mind giving you a little bit of their time because they know the value you can bring to them in the long run, that's the sweet spot. Just do anything you can to give your senior broker his time back. And eventually, you'll start bringing in some cash flow yourself, and he'll like that as well.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that in a minute here. But great point on that is what a senior broker is looking for. You just don't want to be the junior broker who's only doing the dry cleaning and picking up the photocopies, because there's so much more to the business. And if you get stuck in a rut that's all you're doing exclusively for a couple of years, it's going to be hard seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But I agree completely with that. And it reminds me of a story. We have a new guy at our office who started probably about the same time you did, actually. And we had a homeless person break into the building, into our mechanical room at the back, and he took a giant dump in the mechanical room, and it was like a pop can sized dump. And the new junior guy, without hesitation, offered to go and clean it up, and he cleaned it up. So he was literally shoveling shit for that beginning part of the of his career, and he's a legend in my mind for that. He's very productive. He's an active agent. He's a really good agent now, but he was prepared to do a lot of those things at the beginning to ingratiate himself with the rest of the office, and he did. I'll never forget that him shoveling that. So that's a great point on that. And actually, before we get into some of the things that you did to start getting business early on, we had a question come in from Neil. Neil, thanks for joining in. And the question, and if anyone else has questions as we're going through this for Tanner, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get to those as well. But Neil asked, once you found a team you liked, was it still a stressful transition into industrial?
So the short answer is yes, it is stressful. I think any new job is going to bring on some sort of uncertainty and stress. You're learning a completely new skill. And so it was stressful, and there's a lot to learn. I kept saying it's like drinking water out of a fire hydrant. There's so much information, so much to learn. I also came in at peak craziness of, right in the COVID phase of where my team was just gangbusters with activity. And so they were, it was a lot to learn. But, I would say it took me a full year to finally get my feet underneath me. I kept wanting to prematurely get out into the market and start, doing some tenant rep work, investment sale work, whatever I could do. And the managing partner kept saying, slow down, you're doing a good job, keep learning. You want to provide value so bad. But the way you do that is by staying focused and learning as much as you can about the industrial asset or whatever asset class you're in. as well as the market. You got to learn the market, or you're not going to be able to have real conversations with investors or occupiers. You got to learn the market. Once I hit that 1 year mark, I finally got my feet underneath me, and I'm out knocking on doors, and it just comes out like second language now.
It really does. That's a great way of describing it, is that you come into it almost like learning French, as an example, where you look at it and you're like, I can't speak a word of this. But before you know it, once you're talking to more people and you become more fluent in it, it does become second nature. So when you were focusing on learning industrial real estate and you were focusing on becoming an expert in the local market, how'd you go about that? What was your game plan?
So another perk of being on top broker's team is he has a ton of data. He's got his CRM, or however they track it. They're tracking the market, and there's a ton of lease comps, sales comps. So that was a great place for me to just get a general understanding of where the market is. Another piece was driving the market. It's always recommended on the weekends when the parks aren't very busy. You can just drive by and look at the different industrial parks, what kind of occupiers are there. Once you start getting a feel for that, you start looking at it from a higher level, functionality of the building, accessibility to roadways, all of those start coming into play. I'm trying to think. And then really just touring the market. It really comes down to touring the market and understanding comps.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say this. You're in Florida, I'm in Western Canada. So we're on the other side of the continent from one another in completely different markets, but there's so much similarity and overlap between what you're doing there and what I'm doing here. And I've said this numerous times as well. Driving the market on a weekend is one of the most productive things you can do, whether you're a brand new broker or a seasoned broker, because you just learn so much that you wouldn't see by going onto a computer or just trying to pick it up through osmosis. You actually need to physically go and do that. And I love the point you made too about the value of touring properties. That'd be those would be the two recommendations I'd have for anybody getting into this business. Spend your weekends driving industrial parks and get through as many properties as you can. And ideally, if you can listen to a tenant talk about a building, or you can listen to a seasoned broker talk about the building, now you're getting a sense of the language. And it gets back to, when you start off, you don't understand how everybody's talking about it. But the more you get into it, the more you immerse yourself into it, then you start realizing that clear ceiling heights are important to some users, but they're less so for others. And you only get that knowledge from actually doing it. There's not a textbook. There's no book out there that will actually spell this all out for you. You have to get your hands a little bit dirty. We're sometimes called dirty booters in industrial real estate because we're walking through construction sites and mud. So you got to get your feet dirty and your hands dirty on it. So great points. Thanks for sharing that. And I'd emphasize that as well. So those are two great points. So I want to hear how you started developing business for yourself. But before we even do that, on the topic of being a local market expert, I'd just even love to hear a little bit more about Jacksonville and North Florida in general, and what's happening in that industrial market.
Yeah. So Jacksonville, when these companies are looking to build a warehouse or occupy a warehouse, they want to be in the four quadrants of the United States. And so they look at the Southeast, and typically you have Charleston, you have Savannah, and Jacksonville. Those are the three ports on the Southeast that they're considering, and the markets they're considering. And so when we look at the ports, it's the driver for our cities. Right now, Jacksonville just completed last year the deepening of the harbor. We're at 47 feet deep, and so we're on par with Savannah and Charleston. We're half the distance, port to buoy, and oh, by the way, we're a 2-lane. So compared to Savannah, that's a 1-lane. And so we are congestion free. We do about 1.5 million tons a year, and we have capacity to do 3 million. And so we have the capacity to double what we're doing now. And that harbor deepening has really opened up the gates to receive more ships, bigger ships, and to meet that capacity. And so the other piece of it is, infrastructure. Our highway system here is very important for logistics. We have I-10 that runs from Jacksonville all the way to the West Coast. And we have I-95 that runs all the way down to Miami and all the way up to Maine, north. And so we're right at this intersection from a logistics standpoint, to where if you want to get on the highway for easy highway access, well, we have that here. And then another piece of that is the other fundamental piece of it would be the Navy. We have a Navy here. It's our largest employer. They hire about 30,000 people a year, or 30,000 employees are go to work there. 3,000 enter the workforce market here in Jacksonville. And so it's quite an easy transition for those Navy service members to jump into some sort of higher level management position inside of a warehouse. They're pretty easy to point out. And the most important factor that I really love the city and being in the industrial space here is our labor market. Savannah, typically wins a lot of the bigger box retailers because of the ships. But for these other companies, they look at all these factors, and at the top of their list is labor. How much does it cost, per hour for the labor, and how abundant are they? Well, Savannah, the market is airtight. Everyone's battling over employees. Or you could come here to Jacksonville, and our labor market is huge. We have plenty of labor available, and so we've really been winning a lot of bids from businesses when they consider where they want to be in the Southeast. Jacksonville keeps winning over and over again. That's from an occupier standpoint. From a developer standpoint, they say, well, should we build here in Jacksonville? Well, if you're looking at Class A industrial, we're at less than 1% vacancy. It is we are so tight, and that includes functional Class B as well. Our overall market is experiencing historic low vacancy rates. Some right around 2%, call it. 5% would be normal. 2% is airtight. What I've been doing is a lot of tenant rep work, and those conversations have not been fun to have. We keep seeing, these occupiers signed a lease 5 years ago. I call it 2018, 2019. Their lease is coming up for renewal. And the landlords, they know what the market's conditions are, and so they're experiencing, 50% increases up to 100% increase on their rent. And I have the conversation with them. Hey, we're not paying that rent. We want to find somewhere new. And so going back to knowing the market, you can help educate them and help them give them a better understanding of what the market's what's available in the market, and is it worth moving. So from a developer standpoint and an occupier standpoint, Jacksonville is a great place to be right now.
What I love about what you just said there is how confident you said it and how much knowledge you packed into a couple of minutes. And I'd encourage anybody that's in this business or getting into this business to be prepared to have that exact same amount of knowledge at your fingertips, because I'm sure you could ask that question all the time. What's happening in the market? What does it look like? Whether that's somebody in Jacksonville, it's a tenant, whether it's a landlord, whether it's somebody outside of Florida that's just inquiring, you're going to get asked those types of questions all the time. And how you just broke that down into a very neat and concise tidbit, sound bites almost on talking points that people could be like, okay, I know I took a few really good things from there. Wonderful. And I'm sure you're having that conversation all the time. So good on you for doing that. I see there's a couple questions that came in, which I think are going to be a natural segue into this next part. Zayed, I hope I'm saying your name right. Any tips for prospecting, especially for new agents? Thanks for the question, and this is where I wanted to go into next, anyways. So appreciate the question, and Tanner, I'll turn that over to you. When you, now that you had this confidence, you were comfortable talking to people, delivering a message just as you were about your expertise in the market and the value add that you can provide to people. How did you translate that now into actually going to get some business? And to Zayed's point, any tips that you had and things that worked for you when you were prospecting?
Yeah, so I think there's a constant debate between the phone and in-person prospecting. The phone, you'll have volume, but the quality of the interaction is reduced. And so I found success in knocking on doors. That's been my experience in any business development in the food distribution space. And I've transferred that over to the industrial space as I'm prospecting for tenant rep opportunities. And so knocking on doors, it's really given me a viewpoint of what's happening behind those doors. You just drive by a warehouse, you have no idea what's going on behind those doors. And so actually knocking on the doors, speaking with the people, having them see your face, having those conversations, you never know how those conversations are going to go. You never know what relationships may come. You know, there's a balancing act. I've started off on the kind of smaller square footage. I don't like to go under 10,000 square feet because it's not worth my time necessarily. But you find those, which 10,000 square feet might sound small, but they might have a lease that's coming up. They got bought out by a larger company, and hey, we need 50,000 square feet by the end of the year, or 100,000 square feet. You never know what kind of growth these companies are heading into. And so I would just highly recommend finding an industrial park and just starting a grid, door by door, property by property, introducing yourself. You got to be top of mind. No one's going to call your name because you called them on the phone one time. But if you go and shake their hand and have a real conversation with these occupiers, I think that goes a long way. And I could tell you, I see I've already experienced the fruit of my labor, and I've had some good success so far, and I'm 6 months into it.
Congrats on that. That's exciting. And I'd echo those comments. When I first started, I did both. I tried cold calling and I've made thousands of calls and I had success with it, but the most success I had by far was actually walking into spaces, walking into properties. You see so much as well. You actually get to understand their business and understand perhaps constraints that they have or issues that they have. When you were going through these spaces, what was your general message? You perhaps getting in meeting with the secretary right at the beginning. How did you get through to the person that was actually going to make the decision?
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? What's nice going back to the smaller space, typically these companies, the COO answers the door. He's the person that you speak with. But there are quite a few instances where you run into the receptionist and the gatekeeper, whatever you want to call them, and you have to figure out how to navigate that. So right now, our team has a lot of new development coming to market, and so I've been using that as almost my reason why I'm stopping by, even though there's more to it. But that's part of it. Hey, we have some new space coming on the market. I just want your company to be aware of it in case you're looking for expansion, maybe consolidation, maybe you have a lease expiring. Is that something? Are you the person who I should be speaking with? And typically some of them don't like giving that information. I have my business card, or some brochures, and I have it all in a nice packet. So I just hand it to them. I said, if they don't want to give me their name, or if they do, hey, could you hand this information to them just so they have it? And there's been instances where I've had very cold interactions that way. And lo and behold, 48 hours later, I'm getting a call from the director of operations, and hey, they need some more space. And so that's been how I get in the door. Sometimes the receptionist will give you a phone number, potentially a name. I like to ask for a business card of who that may be. And, if they give that to you, that's really great. If not, can you find out a name of the person who you should be speaking with before you leave? That could be valuable. And just having that name will be a tremendous amount of value as a follow-up phone call. And so Colliers has been kind enough to give me some training on the phone. So I do have a method of following up with a phone call after that in-person conversation, in hopes to set up a meeting with the decision maker.
Yeah, as you're explaining that, it sounds very simple, but it's brilliant in its simplicity. And I agree completely. And again, this goes back to the fact that we're in completely different cities, but there's so many similarities on this. I'm a big believer as well that anytime you're prospecting, your best chance of success is if you're providing something of value. And what a lot of new agents, especially ones that don't have a lot of experience, do is that they'll just go in and say, hey, does anyone need to lease space in here, or something to that effect. It's just very direct. Whereas I think if you contrast to what you're doing, is you're going in with a brochure of a new development, and your message is just saying, we've got a new property going up just down the street from you, something to this effect anyways. Just want to see if you guys need any space, or you're just curious what's happening in the market. And if you can provide some market information, and every company that's occupying real estate, that real estate is a very expensive line item on their statements. So they're very cognizant of what that number means. So I've found that most companies are willing to talk if you're giving them information. If you're just trying to make it one-sided about, hey, I need you to work with me because I'm the best broker, you probably are going to get even more cold responses. But if you're giving them something of value and actual information, I think that they're much more involved in that process. So I couldn't agree with that more on how you're approaching that. And I'm certain that if you were to continue on that trajectory and just always adding value, always trying to explain to people how you're offering them something as opposed to trying to get something, and then you put them into your CRM and you're following up with them regularly, you're going to be the guy. You deliver the quick presentation that you showed me about Jacksonville's market. You're following up with them consistently. You're giving them market information. You're responsive. You're the guy. It's just that's the fact of the matter. So it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. It really is just a matter of how can you meet more people, how can you give more people value, and then following up with them until they have a need.
And I want to add one more thing. Oh, by the way, Mr. Occupier, my service is completely free to you. Tenants don't pay. A lot of them, I've noticed this as a trend. They think they'll get a better deal if they reach out to the listing agents and don't have a broker. They think they'll be able to save some money. And so I have to educate them. Look, any advisory that I provide you and your team, it's completely free. And all the way until you find the space, I'll help you all the way with negotiating the lease, get the lease drafted, make sure all the talking points are in there. And once you finally occupy the space, it's nothing out of your pocket. So that's the greatest sell of them all.
Yeah, and it's not even really a sell. It's
No.
advisory, it's consulting. And some of the most successful transactions I've had were ones that I didn't have to sell. They were ones that actually, like you said, you're explaining how you're going to be involved in the process and what you can offer. If you can relay to them information that they didn't even know before, that they don't have to pay you directly. Those are all just consulting and advisory add-ons to give to them. So one more question that came in from Afsel. White, if you don't mind pulling that one up.
Yeah, hey Chad, I'll just read this one to you just because there's a typo, so it's just easier if I do. So I'm pretty sure he's asking, how does a new inspiring investor become their local industrial market expert, especially Class B?
Thanks, Wyatt. And yeah,
You're welcome.
Class B is a very fascinating asset right now. Someone asked on Twitter the other day what their investment thesis would be to invest in any asset class right now, and my answer was Class B industrial in the Sun Belt. So this is right in your neck of the woods. And I know Tanner, that you have aspirations to be an investor as well. So to Asal's question, how would so you got to take off the broker hat for a second and put on the investor hat. How would you recommend to someone they could become a local industrial market expert?
Inspiring investor to become a local industrial market expert. So as an investor, what I notice, a lot of them reach out to all the brokerage firms, speak with industrial brokers, pick their brain. And, the brokers will be happy to speak about their market because you'll be a potential buyer of an asset. And so as a new inspiring investor, Class B is absolutely where you want to be, if you could afford it. And I almost want to say Class C isn't a terrible place to start at all either. As long as the building's not falling apart, you could still find some nice infill opportunities. It would be having those conversations with the brokers, understanding what's the current lease rate. If you have a property in mind, ask a broker, hey, I'm considering buying this property. What do you think it would lease for? Is the purchase, what should the purchase price be? What kind of cap rate should I be looking at on the entry and potentially the exit on the other end, depending on how long you want to hold. So that would be my suggestion, reaching out to, here's an easier way. Go on to CoStar or LoopNet, pull up properties, go to contacts, and you'll see the broker, the listing agents. You'll find all sorts of contacts who are experts in industrial with their phone numbers right there. And you could reach out to them that way.
Great point. And I encourage people to reach out to brokers as well. As you said, brokers are very eager to talk and share their knowledge. Even if there's no potential deal for them, a lot of brokers will just take that forward-looking approach where they might get a deal from that person down the road. So having more conversations for a broker is never a bad thing. So I would encourage you to reach out to brokers as well. And then just read everything you can on the local market. You essentially want to be a local market expert the same as Tanner is. You want to really understand that local market the same. So read all the research reports that come out. All the major brokerages like Colliers and CB and JLL, they'll all put out quarterly reports for all the major markets, and there's a lot of info and data that goes into those, so you can see some of the big sales that have happened. You can see some of the big leases, and then just check listings all the time. If LoopNet and CoStar is the easiest, but even if all you did, if you didn't want to pay for those services, is you just went onto the big brokerage websites and see what listings they have, just so you can start getting a familiarity of what certain properties are leasing for. So once you do that enough times, and then adding into driving an industrial park every weekend, I think this is applicable for investors or brokers. And then you start piecing all this together. Now you'll know, you'll see a building come on the market, call it a 50,000 square foot Class B building, and you'll say, well, I've got a pretty good idea what that's going to lease for because I've looked at all these other comps and I've seen things coming available. So it really is just, you have to understand the market first and foremost, and then understand your downside risk as well. And without going too much into detail on that right now, you need to understand low ceiling height's an impediment, or there's certain areas that aren't attractive. And I don't know about Jacksonville specifically, but do you have flood zones there?
Yes, we do. Yeah. We also have environmentally challenged zones as well. So as a new investor, I would get familiar with what a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental is. That could be very important on the investment side.
What's driving the environmental issues?
And this is a certain area, but it's where the Class C is. and it looks like a great dollar per square foot, great opportunity. It just had to do with previous users and I guess more lax government interference on what was allowed there. Just say dumping of chemicals or a previous, there was like a bumper plant where they would dip the bumpers in some kind of nickel or something. And that got into the soils and the water. And so, but that's a very small area. You know, but the challenge is with those as an investor, well, the banks won't loan you money for a property like that. And so you think, well, I could do a seller finance or I could buy it cash. But you know, when you go to sell it, your buyer pool is dramatically shrunk because they can't get financing. And so little nuances like that, you just need to be aware of.
Yeah, and it goes back to that drinking from a fire hose. You've got to understand all of this, and whether you're going to be a broker or an investor, I don't think you should be making big decisions until you have a fundamental grasp on all this. So I'd say don't rush into anything. That seems like that was the advice you got from your managing partner as well, is don't rush into trying to do this until you have a firm understanding. I think that also relates to investors. Don't invest just because you're attracted to the asset class or you think that's going to have great returns. You really do need to have a solid understanding of the industry before you go through that. So a good point on that. Thanks for going into that.
Yeah. And so what we like to do with developers or investors, you know, we typically bring them into the office, give them a virtual tour of the market, and then we'll go drive it. You know, it takes about 4 hours. Our market's, you know, fairly easy to access. It's not like Atlanta where it takes, you know, a few hours to go from one industrial park to the other. We could cover the entire market fairly quickly. And get you brought up to speed. And we always recommend anything, if you want to get into the market, let us give you a background overview of all the different parks and, you know, what our market trends are. And then you just hang around the rim. You keep looking, looking for opportunities, and eventually, call it a year, 2 years down the road, the right opportunity will present itself and you'll be in a position to strike.
Yeah, well said. I want to transition, and perhaps we could end off on this as well, as on social media. And we still have a few minutes here. So if anyone does have any other questions for Tanner, please do feel free to put those in the chat. But one thing that I've noticed, and I'm older than you are, but I'm not older as old as some of the senior brokers out there. So I'm kind of right in that middle spot where I love technology. I love social media. I have a podcast. So I'm obviously embraced social media and everything that comes with it. But I also find that the younger generation specifically tends to use it as a crutch, and perhaps they also look at it as a way that they can circumvent having to do those old school prospecting methods such as door knocking or cold calling. In my experience, I've found that social media is helpful, but it's the equivalent of having a football team. And I've used this analogy all the time. But to win a football game, you need to have all the players on your team on the field. And social media is one of those players. It's very hard to win a football game if you have one player out there. So social media can be very beneficial, but it's not going to win a game unless you also have a player on the team that's cold calling and door knocking. And this is encompassing what one person's responsible to do. But with you being a year and a half into the business now, what has been your experience using social media, and how have you used it, and how have you had success or lack of success on that?
Yeah. So there's no doubt that social media technology needs to be a part of your plan in one way or another. And so for me, LinkedIn is definitely one of the top platforms that I use. And the name of the game for me, and my underlying thesis for this year, is networking. I've got to get my name out there. I've got to meet new people. And that's where the opportunities lie, is within those relationships. And so LinkedIn is a great platform to keep building on those relationships. And, a general idea of the way that would work is you go to some sort of networking event, you get some business cards, and you follow up the next day and just say it was a pleasure meeting you, and you keep just building that network there. The other platform would be Twitter. In fact, that's how this interview came to be. Someone was asking about Savannah's port, and I chimed in with a little bit of information and figured I would share a little bit more about the Southeast. And so Twitter's been a great platform. I've noticed it's been more investor forward on Twitter. A lot of investors there are looking to deploy capital. In fact, one of my connections there has been one of the few investment sales that has executed this year. He bought a Williams-Sonoma building, 138,000 square feet. And so it was interesting to see, hey, I know this guy from Twitter. I've had conversations with him. And now here he is in the market buying a brand new Class A industrial building with a quality tenant. And so Twitter's been great as well. Yeah.
And I think you posted on that was a $140,000 commission, something to that effect.
Oh, that was separate. I was just
okay.
Bragging about sourcing a tenant for an iOS industrial outside storage site that our team was the listing agent on.
Yeah, there's big fees involved in there, and I like that point that you made, is that I think you need to have social media right now. I think the brokers that are reluctant to get onto it, or investors that are reluctant to get onto it, are really missing a lot of opportunities. And it doesn't need to be onerous. It doesn't need to spend 8 hours a day. In fact, you shouldn't spend 8 hours a day on social media. It should just be something that supplements your business. When you're on social media, what's your general message? What are you trying to portray when you're thinking of engaging or putting posts or comments? What's your general strategy for that?
That's a great question, Chad.
And I don't have one either. So
okay, all right, good. I can feel a little bit better here. And I listened to your interview with I can't remember the lady's name, but she does really well on social. And so I think one of her big no-nos was the constant flood of, hey, I have this listing, or hey, this just went for sale, and it's just kind of all about you. There is those are some posts. I'm trying to figure out how to do a better mix of what am I looking to get out of it, or put out there into my followers' ears. And so one of it is, it has to be the new listings. It has to be, hey, we just closed on these 2 investment sales this year, which you obviously post on. Really just things that matter to you. LinkedIn is different than Twitter. Twitter, I gear it more towards probably helping out younger brokers, just so they can follow along on my journey, where LinkedIn is a bit more professional and buttoned up.
Yeah, the only strategy that I have is kind of on that topic of Beverly giving advice. I tend to look at it as if you're in a big networking function, and say everybody organizes themselves in a big circle and they go around and everybody's talking about themselves for a minute. What are you going to fill that minute with? Because that's really the attention span that you're dealing with if you're on social media, because there's so much information and so much noise out there. So what do you fill that minute with? And some people might just go in and talk about how great they are. They might just say, here's all the deals that I closed last year, and here's all the people that I'm working with, and here's how awesome I am. And that might resonate with some of them. But I think a much more powerful message is if you can give value. And it just goes back to that whole value add concept of whatever you're doing. If you can add value, I think you just increase your chances of success. I think it's the same. It's my whole format with this podcast and with YouTube in general, is I really just try to throw out as much value as I can with the hope that somebody finds it helpful. That's my approach. That doesn't mean that that's the best approach, because I think the one guy who gets up and talks about how great he is, if there's somebody that's in the market for what he has to sell and they see that he's the best, or at least he believes he's the best, maybe that resonates with that person. So I don't have a perfect format on that either. I just know that it's, you and I met on Twitter, and that's fascinating. The fact that we're on the other side of the continent and we had this chance to chat in person now, all because of Twitter. And I think it was because neither one of us was trying to sell the other person or try to be overly aggressive. It was just, is there an opportunity to chat about this? And I think as a high overarching philosophy on social media, I think that does well, but it's a much slower approach as opposed to getting something immediate. So if you do find a system that does work for you, please do share it. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up episode if you crack that magic code too.
Sure. Yeah.
So we'll wrap up there. I'm going to put links to your LinkedIn and your Twitter in the description, and then just stick with me for a second here because I just have a quick closing note. If anyone's available at 3:00 Eastern, my friend Ron Rohde is doing putting out a video where him and I are talking about the effects inflation is going to have on the commercial and industrial real estate market. And we go head to head on this. It's not both of us agreeing with the other person's point. We have a healthy debate on this. So I'll put a link to that in the comments as well. That's at 3:00 Eastern. And back to this show, I really do thank you, Tanner, for taking the time to jump on this. If you're watching this, if you like this, please give us a thumbs up. If you didn't like this, give us a thumbs down. I like feedback of all kinds, so thumbs up or thumbs down. And I encourage you to reach out to Tanner on LinkedIn and Twitter. And Tanner, well, one of these days when I'm in Florida, I'd love to connect and grab coffee or a beer as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jacksonville has a lot of things happening for it. In general, we got $4.7 billion in investment happening in our downtown riverfront revitalization. So there's just so much happening here, and we'd love to have you, Chad. So if you ever visit, I'd love to give you a full tour.
Love it. Okay, well, we'll be in touch. Thank you once again for sharing all your insight, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. Catch you next week.